I was adopted from Korea in 1971. I was almost 3 years old, and I was adopted to a conservative, white, middle class family in the suburbs of Minneapolis. And it was a fairly small community that I was raised in. It was very predominantly white. I joke sometimes that I think there were more Black students in my school district than there were Asian students, but that's not saying much. The bar was really low.
Mm,
So I grew up with almost no diversity. I was the diversity, not just in my community and my church and my school, but in my family too. So I'm the only person that's adopted in my family. I have two siblings who are younger than me. So the only Asian person in a white family. And what that meant for me was that I grew up in complete isolation. I didn't know anything about being Korean, much less being Asian. And it took me until I was in college to really start to confront and grapple my racial and ethnic identity. And a large part of that was because I had the freedom to do so once I was in college and wasn't surrounded by, I was still predominantly white spaces. Don't get me
mhm.
wrong, I lived in Minnesota,
Oh,
but without my family around, I had the freedom to start exploring a little bit more. And so a lot of my work that I do now is around transracial adoption. And one of the things that I want to try and help other people understand outside of our community of transracial adoptees is that it's so hard for transracial adoptees who have white parents and white families to even feel like they have the permission
mm,
to start exploring their racial identity in any kind of a meaningful way because it's inherently set up to make us feel like we're being disloyal to our families. And I always talk about adoption as being like in social work. So anybody who's familiar with social work, when we think about the micro, the meso, and the macro, families are that kind of micro. It's our relationships with our family members. And it's really hard for anybody to think, oh, I can really love my parents and my family and feel like I had a strong, safe childhood and yet be completely critical of the larger macro systems that created that and
yeah.
the impact that it has. So we're not seeing very often transracial families where the parents are making the decision to live in the communities where their adopted child is from. We're not seeing scenarios where they're putting themselves to be highlighted as the other so that the child can grow up in community. It's almost always the other way around. And what that does is as we grow up, we're confronted with this whole who are we?
Mm,
When there's a part of us that feels so culturally identified with our adoptive families, but as adults in the world, we're seen as part of our communities of origin and they don't understand us and we don't understand them. So it's really challenging for transracial adoptees. A lot of my work really is built on that experience. But again, I'm a latecomer to that. I
yeah.
didn't start to think about those things really seriously until I was almost in my 30s.